The town woke on a rumor that smelled like coal and fresh bread. People asked the same small question at every stall. Did you see it? That question loosened mouths, and mouths loosened stories. You couldn't pay attention without noticing the edges of things. A woman's folded shawl, a broken cartwheel, a poster with a sketch pinned up overnight. The first lines we ever meet were not words. They were the stroke of a charcoal stick on paper. And those first lines asked a dangerous question. What does truth look like when nobody wants to see it? She was the kind of kid people notice only when they make you notice. 15, smaller than most, hands stained by soot and graphite, eyes that never blinked when she traced a face. While other kids chased hoops, she caught shadows and held them on page. Her drawings didn't prettify, they exposed. A taxman's greed looked heavier in her renderings. A soldier's worry showed in the hollows of a cheek. Folks laughed at first. Then they stopped. The sketches did something dangerous. They made neighbors look at neighbors differently. Once that happens, a city shifts. One fog-slick night, a soldier left a folded sheet at her stall, boots soft on cobbles. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The paper was a commission disguised as fear. Draw what might come. He put his coin down and backed away like a man who knew the weight of his own words. She drew a square in ruin, a statue struck, a crown tipped like a bad coin. When she finished, she felt it in her chest, not pride exactly, more like a quiet knowing. She handed it back through the window. The soldier left with that little paper tucked under his coat, and the town never quite breathed the same. Pictures are sneakier than speeches. A boy with sticky fingers copied the sketch and sold it for bread. A baker pinned a copy by the loaf. A woman folded one into a pocket and took it to a tavern, where the drawing passed from hand to hand, like contraband. With every fold and refold, the lines hardened into something that didn't feel accidental. Coincidences started to line up like dominoes. A carriage wheel breaks where she'd shaded a crack. A captain's horse rears where she'd sketched a toppled rider. People began to whisper the kind of phrase you only say when you're trying to deny what you believe. It's just a coincidence. Word reached the minister's office, and inside offices officials have a way of making panic look tidy. A bulletin went out, a formal sheet, stamped, the kind of paper that turns rumor into law. It warned citizens to report unauthorized imagery that incites unrest. Throwing in the word incite made it legal and modest all at once. Print shops were told to flag suspicious orders, tavern owners to watch faces, and street criers read the notice in the square, like a prayer. The town changed its gait. People walked quieter. They folded sketches tighter. She learned how quickly freedom can be dressed in civility. No men in black barged in. There was no dramatic scene of chains and torches. Instead, the law crept in with ink and signatures. Artists needed licenses. A simple sheet of vellum became a gauntlet. Everyone who sold paper or thread suddenly had paperwork to worry about. Her mother, mending gloves by lamplight, said, "Keep your hands clean, child." But clean hands can be the worst kind, polished, invisible. The law told people they were still safe if they obeyed, and most people obeyed. At night, under a roof stitched with drafts, she drew the king. Not the official portrait, the thing behind the portraits. She drew a crown that sagged like a tired thing, jewels running into ink-streaked rivers. She shaded his mouth as if it had been sealed with a cloth. When she finished, the paper looked less like prophecy and more like a mirror. She folded it and hid it in a place a child would forget, inside the heel of an old boot in her stall. Some pictures you hide because they'll get you killed. Others you hide because they'll get the world listening. Not everyone who sees power is loyal to it. A clerk thin, ink-stained, The sort of person who knows which form goes where, slipped her a scrap with 2 words. Trust Rook. He had the look of someone who lives in columns of numbers and small rebellions. Rook started by closing a drawer at the right time, by misplacing a notice, by pointing a guard the wrong way. Allies like that are quiet. You don't see them until the thing they protected is gone. In his notes he kept a stack of stolen sketches, not to profit, to preserve. With Rook's pointers, she found a basement beneath a tavern where a few hands hung her small works like secret prayers. It smelled like stale ale and possibility. Men and women read in silence. They moved their heads, whispering. The cellar felt like a religion for people who'd been taught not to pray. It was dangerous, and so it felt honest. That night they pinned the king's crooked crown to a beam, and handed a coin to a drummer who swore to spread the image. To make a picture public in a time that forbids speech is to begin a revolution without shouting. Galleries are brave only until someone trips up. A journeyman forgot caution and showed a sketch to a merchant who had ink on his cuff and eyes too quick. The merchant sold bread by morning and panic by noon. Someone in the market saw a copy too close to a ledger's table, and a ledger man liked ledgers. Ledgers make notes, and notes get read, and read notes travel to the minister's desk. The cellar that had felt safe now trembled. The girl slept with a satchel by her bed, and learned the names of every friend's face like a prayer list. The market was the city's throat, everything passed through it. Bread, gossip, ledgers. When a sketch landed too close to a merchant's accounts, the ledger keepers smelled a problem like dogs smell blood. A copy of the girl's crown sketch fluttered into a pile of receipts, and somebody with a clean cuff carried that flutter into an office, where men in neat coats counted power like coins. By sundown, the mood in the square had shifted. The laughter thinned. The sketches were no longer pretty curiosities. They were evidence someone could point to. Power avoids spectacle when it can. The minister ordered a campaign clever as a fox, a smear thinly veiled as caution. Pamphlets printed warnings about irresponsible imagery. A respected poet was paid to write a subtle essay on the dangers of rumor. The campaign smelled of civility, but it was a net. Newspapers printed corrections that dug at the girl's character. She was unstable, a meddler, a trouble seeker. Real talk. They made the danger look like common sense. When you poison a story with facts dressed as concern, people swallow it whole. They moved like a storm that doesn't roar. First the shutters of a neighbor's home closed, then a pair of boots clicked the lane, then a knock that came with authority. They searched the attic, not with swords but with lists, names, addresses, suspicious acquaintances. They found scraps, little drawings shoved under beams and inside boot heels. They took a few people for questioning, hauled off a friend who had protected a sketch. The girl hid beneath a pile of cloth, breath pressed against the rafters. She heard them talk. We'll make an example. The word example is what tyrants use when they mean erase. You can be punished without a courtroom. They convened what was called a review, a small room, a few officials, a ledger on a table. She was brought in like proof rather than person. They read complaints, slid inked paragraphs across the table, asked if she'd incited unrest. She answered with the quiet that makes people uneasy. Truth doesn't always look like thunder. The clerk read a formal note. Prohibition of unauthorized depictions linked to sedition. Her name was noted, then crossed, then the paper stamped. The clerk's hand was steady. The minister's face was polite. The city learned a new civic rule: obey or be made invisible. They did not haul her to the gallows. They did worse. They took her legitimacy. She returned home carrying a folded decree that said she could not sell, teach, or display art. No permit, no livelihood. No legal paper would carry her name. The paper folded like a trap. Her mother wept quietly over a pot she could not afford to heat. And the girl sat on a low stool and thought of all the places a picture could go when no law watched. She tucked the decree inside her satchel and drew on scrap after scrap, small, quick sketches like sparks. Despite the decree, the underground gallery pulsed. People were braver in small rooms. The tavern cellar filled again. Hands passed coins, eyes read lines as if they were prayer. Someone had the nerve to paste a copy of the banned Crown on a market board at dawn. A crowd gathered, muttered, then dispersed. But the image stayed. It was a kind of guerrilla worship, image by image. The town remembered. The girl, from the attic, heard the low murmur of voices praising lines she had tried to hide. The sound swelled something in her that wasn't relief. It was responsibility. Rook the clerk kept doing little illegal things that weren't worth a ledger entry, but cost him sleep. He switched a courier's manifest, delayed a patrol roster by minutes, flagged a petition to be misplaced. One night he handed the girl a scrap with a single line. "They will look for the pen, not the hand." It meant they'd hunt for the source in the usual places, the print shops, the known rebels, and miss the small hands that hid in plain sight. Rook's risks were quiet. The city had big rules, but sometimes tiny acts of bureaucratic sabotage push a mountain. Children are messengers, adults forget. A baker's kid, bored and clever, found a scrap behind a sack of flour and doodled the tilted crown on his own bread wrapper. He sold a loaf, and another kid saw the sketch and pointed it out to his schoolmate. Before long, children traded copies like marbles. The sketches found mouths that weren't yet taxed by caution. Teachers began to tell small stories, gently, about a girl who drew what she saw. The truth crowds history in the way small people pass gossip, careless and unstoppable. Power has a price list. Investors, merchants, guild leaders, those who benefit from order, started to lean into the minister's policy. They wrote letters asking for enforcement because stability meant profit. In private, some said the minister's move was smart. In public, they applauded civility. The girl's art was inconvenient to trade, so it had to be smoothed out. Yet, with every enforcement request, a new risk opened. People remembered why the images existed. Profit can pay for a patrol, but it cannot buy back the sight that sparked dissent. Scene 20. The girl's quiet answer, 1252, 1430. She answered not with speeches but with smaller, sharper art. She drew on beer mats, on wrappers, on the backs of receipts, a crown here, a cracked wheel there. She sent a folded note to a friend at the market. If they look for the pen, call them foolish. Look at who carries the picture. People began to move the drawings like a living roomer, slipped into sleeves, tucked behind hymnals, rolled into bread. The more they tried to silence her, the more her work grew legs. It wasn't immediate victory. It was a slow seep, a tide under the city's feet. Winter nights have a way of stretching thin, like fabric pulled too far. That night, the air felt wired. Streets were empty too early, door shutters too tight, traders too silent. People sensed something coming before soldiers even touched their helmets. Rumor ran quicker than feet. They're searching again. The girl sat in her attic, back to the wall, charcoal smudged knuckles tapping her knee. Then she heard it, not a knock, but a heavy fist that belonged to law, not people. The quiet she'd lived inside cracked like a dry twig. Guards poured into the street like spilled ink, dark, fast, spreading. Two grabbed the baker downstairs. Another tore a sheet from a wall. They weren't hunting people now. They were hunting meaning, and they found the cellar. They overturned stools, ripped sketches, stomped on copies until the paper bled. One guard held the crown sketch and sneered, "This little thing." This scared the king. But fear doesn't come from paper, it comes from what paper makes people remember. The guard tore it in half. That moment felt like a sentence being broken mid-word. Upstairs, Rook arrived breathless, hands shaking with urgency. "They're coming for you," he whispered. Rook wasn't built for running, he was built for ink and desks, but loyalty changes a man's stride. He handed her one last note, written messy, "Don't fight, hide." She stared at him. "Hide," she said. "They want to erase me." Rook swallowed hard. "They want you visible. Visible is easier to destroy. Hide, and your lines will move without you." He pushed her through the attic hatch that led to the neighbor's roof. His eyes weren't brave, they were terrified. But terrified people sometimes make the bravest choices. From the rooftop she saw the city like a cracked bowl, broken but holding. Crowds were forming not around soldiers but around a single image someone had pasted on a fountain, her tilted crown. She hadn't put it there, she didn't even know who did, but it grew, like moss, under stone. People copied it brilliantly, badly, creatively, charcoal, ink, even soot from chimneys. The crown became a language spoken by those denied speech. Soldiers tore one down, and 3 more appeared. That was the moment she realized, a picture is not powerful because she made it. It was powerful because people understood it. Inside the palace, the king's health faltered. Rumors said he was fevered. Others said he feared his own shadow. Ministers denied everything, but denial grows thin under public hunger. Rook later told her that her sketch had been found on the king's own carriage door, pinned there by someone inside the palace itself. That was when panic became policy. Curfews tightened. Taxes raised. The harder the crown pressed, the weaker it looked. And the weaker it looked, the more her drawing became a mirror people trusted. It happened on a morning too ordinary to predict history. The king's carriage rolled into the square like always. But this time, the front wheel caught a rut. The same rut she had once shaded in a drawing months back. The wheel splintered. The horse reared. The crowd surged. A soldier slipped. Another stumbled. The king's crown tumbled into the mud. A gasp ran through the square like wind before a storm. People didn't say, "The king fell." They said, "It happened exactly like the picture." Some events are accidents, but some accidents feel like prophecy catching up. With the crown in the mud and the ministers fleeing behind curtained windows, the city awoke like a sleeper remembering a nightmare. People carried her images openly now, not as rebellion but as recognition. Someone painted the crown on a cloth and hung it on the city gate. Someone carved it into bread dough. Someone scratched it into clay pots. Her work moved like a second heartbeat under the cobblestones. She walked among them, hood low, unseen, a ghost watching herself become real. Weeks passed. A council replaced the ministers. Old laws were burned, literally burned, flames licking decrees until they curled. Rook visited her attic with ink-stained fingers and an exhausted smile. "They want to clear the lists," he said. "Restore names." She blinked. "Restore." Rook nodded, "Including yours." But she didn't smile. Names can be restored, but trust takes longer. She touched the edge of the decree once used to silence her, and felt a quiet weight lift. She never wanted fame. She wanted truth to breathe without fear. 12:40. Rook brought her fresh paper, thick, clean, uncreased. She hadn't touched unmarked sheets in months. Her hands trembled. "You can draw openly now," he said. She stared at the blank page. Blank pages can be scarier than arrests. They demand honesty. Then she picked up her charcoal, took a long breath, and made one slow line. It felt like lighting a lantern after a storm. This time, The line wasn't prophecy. It was freedom. Years later, people would forget her face but remember her drawings. Teachers used her tilted crown as a lesson in courage. Bakers etched it into loaves during festivals. Children sketched it on walls when they wanted to feel brave. The king's fall wouldn't be remembered as the collapse of a man, but as the moment a girl with charcoal showed a city the truth behind power. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in attics. Sometimes it fits inside the heel of a boot. But truth survives. Just like the girl who drew the end of The King. If you're ready for more real talk about getting video, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell.